This is the Leadership in Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now.
I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent.
When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation. I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless. Good morning and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Jane Tran, who is COO of Sixfold. Jane, lovely to see you. How are you?
Good. Great to be here.
Yeah. It always feels so fake because we've been chatting for 10 minutes and then ask you how you are. So I apologize for that. It's always the kind of challenge of podcasting, but sometimes I think I should just hit record when these things start. But we always like to start with the sort of who you are, what you do, and who's Sixfold. So I'll leave that for you to take it away.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm a CEO and co-founder of Sixfold. Sixfold is generative AI exclusively built for insurance underwriting. Our goal is to amplify confidence in every underwriting decision using our proprietary models so that we can help underwriters improve their capacity, increase accuracy, and transparency.
Amazing. There's so much to get in there. There's so many keywords of the moment. AI, everything at the moment. But I want to kind of start with the team because I think you've got an interesting story, and you corrected me on some of this when we talked before. But some of the founding team have worked together before. I just want to, you've been through this journey once. How important is that core team, and how do you get that kind of like core founding team magic right from your perspective?
Yeah, so there's three co-founders, myself, Alex, our CEO, and Brian, our CTO. So Alex and I had a really interesting journey together because we were both on the founding team of a company called Uncork, who I know was on the podcast previously. Uncork is a no-code software development platform, and it started in the insurance industry. So we were there for about 6 years in different roles. Right? So we have like deep history, given the growth of Uncork over the last couple of years. And Brian worked with Alex a few companies ago at Cake and Arrow, which is a UX design agency that actually also works in the insurance space. So we've all worked together in different capacities before, but never in the roles that we're in now. And it's been really great. I think what sort of worked for us, at least, was that in our very first meeting together, we set up our company mission and vision in addition to these operating principles. Because I think the three of us, we gravitated towards each other because we have a very similar value set. And then as part of that, because we're all, very much culture people, I think having that North Star was really important for us, as well as what we're going to be looking for as we're building the team. So having just like a core set of things that we're always going to anchor in, like this is what we'll do, this is what we'll never do, to set the ground rules or like the parameters, I think was just really helpful.
It's really interesting because I think a lot of people would think it's something you do, like maybe it evolves or maybe you kind of set that down the line. Is that learned experience? Is that going through this before you made that part of the starting conversation, whereas you might not have done previously?
I think so. I think for the most part, I think most companies at a very early stage, like when you're, creating an idea from scratch, you'll always say like, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And that evolves into some sort of mission vision statement. So I think just given, what we've done recently, I think it was really important for us, especially because we're such in a niche, right? Like we're specifically for insurance underwriting. So I think it was actually a lot easier to define. I think operating principles were really important to us, different than values actually, because I think values can be a lot of different things.
Hmm.
But I think operating principles give you more ground rules. It's like, hey, like one of our operating principles is, we always need to put the customer first, And another one of our ground rules is we'll never build commodity infrastructure. We should just buy it, right? So like some of those things just to give us like, all right, so we know where to focus and we know what our priorities are so that as we're making decisions and as we onboard people to make their own decisions, they can just sort of, re-anchor on it. You did make a great comment in terms of like, it has been really early. So we did actually change those operating principles at the end of last year when we've grown a little bit. But I think the core of those operating principles generally stayed the same.
Hmm. I'm always intrigued about that because we're a very early stage business ourselves. Like FinPro is 5 people. It's not any more than that, and we're always trying to grow. And I think the operating principles is really interesting because I know where we started and where we are now is not quite the same. It's kind of in the same space. We do a little we do a thing every summer, which I think is quite fun. Is that we all go away every summer and it's usually around a conference as a team, and I leave the room and I get everyone to go, what is Alex bad at, and, and what should we do better? And generally, honestly, our operating principles probably come from that conversation because it's like, oh, actually, this is what we said we wanted to focus on. This is what we're not. But I thought it's a really important thing to zero in on because there's lots of people that are entrepreneurs that listen to the podcast. There's lots of investors that do, lots of people that want to start something. And I'm really interested how early you need to start having those conversations and that these are the things that we'll do and these are the things that we won't. Because that, for me, this is my third business and they weren't all recruitment businesses, but that's where the tension seems to lie. If you don't get that right, if you can't agree on that, and it's the things you seem to argue about as you go forward, and that just wastes so much time. So yeah, it's interesting to hear, you guys are having the same journey. Um, culturally, your investors seem to think you've got a lot right, and obviously they would because they wouldn't put the investment in. And I don't think he'll mind me kind of name dropping him, but I was talking to Jonathan Bristol, who was one of your early stage investors and a good friend of the podcast and the business. He's very complimentary. But I wanted to ask you about that early stage investor relationship because you've been through the kind of previous journeys. How different is that early stage relationship versus maybe some of the kind of later stage investors that you have? And yeah, it's kind of interesting to talk about the differences between maybe later rounds and versus that kind of real first few checks.
Yeah, I think it's also just the nature of the size of the business. I think early stage investors are a little bit more involved, right? Because like you're still very tiny. I think early stage investors they go into early stage because they want to be more involved in that way. That being said, I do think all the investors that I've worked with throughout my career, from seed to Series C, they've always been quite responsive, right? So like
Mm,
I think in general, if you find a good investor, they will be as involved as you want them to be. I think just in general, I would say early stage, they're a little bit more invested because you are so small, just like
mm.
so they can there's probably a lot more where they can help, connect you or tie you into. I think a later stage investor, it's a little bit more targeted, right? Because you'll have things a lot more defined. Like you'll have your sales process defined. You'll have, a repeatable, like go to market motion defined. You have all these sort of playbooks defined already. So I think the interaction becomes a little bit different the bigger that you get. But I think all the best investors are generally very responsive and quite representative for the companies that they invest in.
Yeah. Yeah, there seems to be a shared value statement across or values rather than value statements across the investors. And when you meet investors, I think we say this about recruitment all the time and search firms is that if you work in a particular sector, you tend to reflect that sector. So, I tried to change sectors at some point in my career. I was about 10 years in, I'd worked in insurance and I'd worked in kind of the financial markets, and there was a sort of there's a hard edge to it, and everyone's quite direct. And for some reason, unbeknownst only to myself, there was a really good opportunity. It was a startup opportunity, and they were doing sort of educational sector, and it was search. And I lasted about 6 months because I just so was culturally misaligned with that business, and it was it was not direct, and you had to make someone a cup of tea and then have three meetings about their family and children, and then you could ask them why they hadn't done the thing you needed them to do, but you couldn't go, why haven't you delivered this thing? So there's a cultural misalignment. So obviously VCs are sector specific, but I think the investments they make are, they tend to be a sort of, not a mirror would be the wrong word, but there's a cultural alignment between those investments. Otherwise, presumably it just doesn't work. I mean, they might not make the investment, but you do see where it does go wrong and it gets a bit fractious and you just feel like it's just maybe a value statement.
I think so. I think the best investors, or you'll hear a lot of investors talk about conviction. And I think it sort of goes both ways, right? Like, you need conviction to fundraise. And I think you also need conviction for the companies that you want to put money into, right? So I think there is that sort of shared value in the conviction of getting something done, but also like, at least from a founder perspective, all the investors that we have, we spent a lot of time with them. We love working with them. We love Crystal. We love all of the rest of our investors. But they clearly put in the effort to get to know us, our team, and how we operate. And they want to grow with us. And I think that's sort of that culture thing that you were aligning to. And that's what we wanted, right? So I think there's also a thing like what works for me may not work for the next founder, or the next VC, right? If you want something different, you can definitely find an investor for that thing, So I think it sort of depends, as you mentioned, like that culture fit. What are you actually looking for in an investor? And again, what is that investor looking at for their portfolio companies? There's some investors that probably don't want to be as involved, which is okay if you don't want investors involved as involved with the organization. It really just depends on, what you're looking for, and how you're trying to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that surprises people. That I think as people think about investing being financial markets, and unless they're in this kind of world, I didn't realize until I started working with venture-backed businesses how involved they were, firstly, but also how approachable they were to problems and challenges, and just being an agony aunt or uncle occasionally when things aren't going your way, and they're just being that voice of kind of an outside voice to sort of speak to. So it's really interesting that dynamic and that relationship. Another thing Jonathan said, he's been very complimentary about your team, and part of it, he said you were very good at hiring, very good at hiring. And why do you think that is? If you agree, you might not agree. So if you agree with that, I'm presuming you do. What do you think is the secret sauce to hiring, particularly in early stage? Because there's obvious challenges with early stage businesses and hiring talent. You've got risk, you've got people kind of being able to move at speed, wear multiple hats. What do you think you've got right there?
Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan. We do agree. I think a lot of this is it's not probably not the greatest answer, but the three of us, we've hired a lot of people before, and I think over that time, and I'm sure you and your team has the same sort of senses as well. Like sort of just develop a sense, whether or not someone fits. Oftentimes someone will really look great on paper, but when you chat with them, maybe they don't have, we go back to that culture question, maybe they just don't have the right sort of culture fit or the right vibe to what you're looking for at this stage of the company, right? Because I think what we'll probably be looking for culturally is different when we get a little bit bigger. And because usually by the time someone gets to me, I know they sort of check all the boxes, they've done the technical interview. I know, the hard skills are there. But at the end of the day, it's whether or not is this a really great first product hire? Is this a really great first design hire? Because that person is going to champion the growth within, that area. And is that person going to be representative of all the things that, we believe, is crucial for Sixfold? Something that I think is actually a really great litmus test too, just given how we are, something Alex always says is that, we're very plain spoken, which I think is actually a very good thing. And when you're interviewing someone, no matter how junior or senior that they are, I think there's something to be said if they can talk about something that they worked on in a very plain, clear way. So I think oftentimes, especially when you're interviewing, I think people, feel that they have to, showcase the world or, become a very shiny object. And oftentimes you sound much more um, I think you actually sound much more qualified if you can explain something very clearly, even to a non-technical person. So that generally is my litmus test.
Hmm. It's a thing that we talk about with the podcast actually, because it's we invite all different stages of business on. If we're just interested in a business, or and part of that's a screening process. We don't despite what people may think, we do screen out like people that we think can't communicate effectively on the podcast, because we don't want to make anyone look bad, on the podcast either. It's not the right medium for some people. So, we have that conversation. But the thing we talk about a lot is that someone can't explain their business succinctly enough. We go, we're skeptical about the business itself, and that may or may not be fair, but that's the kind of acid test we use. And I think it is the same for interviewing. And I've probably screened 20 people, I don't know, 15 people a week for 18 years of doing this. So it's just like lots of, and it's always about people speaking plainly, being able to explain what they do very, very simply. And also that whole thing of that, when you're talking about yourself as an interview hit for anyone who's ever listening, is that it's a story with you at the middle. So it's like, what did you do? Don't be like, oh, this project. It's like, okay, there's the project, but what did you do with that project? What did you deliver on that project? So yeah, that succinct thing really resonates with me. I feel like we talked about everything about the creation of the business and how good you are at hiring, but probably haven't been fair enough to give you a chance to talk about the things that are really relevant to what you do. So, but one thing that really struck me, you're in the AI space, so you know it better than most people that we're ever talking to on here. But talk about AI, and when you and I talked, you said like you felt like there's a lot of people leaning into like chat and using that, but you felt like it was the wrong model for insurance. And I just wanted to sort of extrapolate that and explain why you thought that.
Yeah, it's probably even broader than insurance. So
Mm,
when ChatGPT first came out, I think everyone fell in love instantly, right? Because it's so easy to interact with this chatbot, right? You ask it a bunch of questions, it's very unstructured, and you get, pretty beautiful answers. And I think because of that initial delight with ChatGPT, I think everyone's like, we just got to put this thing everywhere.
mm,
But in actuality, like these models are so powerful, they can actually fit into a lot of different mediums. And not and chat may not be the perfect medium for these things. I think because it works so well for the ChatGPT use case, people think it's easy or it makes sense to move it into everything else. But I think people forgot like sort of the first principles of design where like, you have to be where your users are. And like for us, our users are underwriters and they live in workbenches, they live in policy admin system, they live in their inbox, right? So our interactions with them may not, we should be in the systems where they are versus, like a chatbot sort of experience off to the side. And so a lot of things that we're doing now with Sixfold, and actually our head of design or our head of product are both in Lloyd's right now, doing user testing for this, is can we come up with a multi-medium experience, like but whether it be like, an extension to their inbox or part of the policy admin system or part of the workbench or even their CRM, where we can get our underwriting results to those underwriters at the time that they need it, and sort of still interact with them in the way where they get the right data that they need. But then there's a usability factor to it where, they get some of the fidelity that you do have with the UI, not just straight data. So we're playing around with a few different things, with our mentors at Lloyd's and also with a few other customers that I think is going to be super interesting. And I can't wait to see where that goes next. But for anyone sort of building this space or just building in general, I think like it's like the shiny object problem, right? Like AI is
mm,
definitely a shiny object, but at the end of the day, you still have to anchor on, again, those first principles of, who's actually using this thing? Where do they live? And like how, where they live within their workflow, and how do you get things to them in the most seamless way possible?
mm. I was thinking as you were saying this, like it's almost like we're talking about AI in the loop rather than human in the loop. It's like bringing that tool that works for them at the point they need it. Um, I don't know if that makes any sense, or I've just thought that was clever and I'm just dropping that
Yeah,
in.
no, it's definitely it because you still need, yeah, exactly. It's like you're not, we're not, this is not a digital transformation type project, right? This is
Mm,
like, how do you just like it's, and probably it is over time. But
yeah.
again, it's like you want a quick win. AI is actually enabling a lot of technology and a lot of operations folks to actually do a lot of these things a lot faster
Mm,
without changing a lot of your core infrastructure. So as you said, it's like, yeah, it's like AI in the loop versus human in the loop. Yes, there'll always still
mm,
be a human loop because so much of what underwriters are doing is artisanal. But how can you just get that to them so they can amplify their workflow without making a massive change? And I think probably that's the harder design problem.
mm. Do you think that's you coming to the table with just a better understanding of the insurance market from previous work? Because I think things that tried to a lot of the solves have been really trying to change behavior in quite a dramatic way. Whereas you're coming at it going, this is the workflow. How do we assist at these different points? Um, because I think, I even think into my industry, we were talking about there's an AI tool that we were given and it was a very clever and it did a lot of sourcing for us. But there was so many one behavioral challenges that we saw about kind of when people wanted to interact and what they needed. So it was kind of really trying to change that entire flow, and it was like too much too soon. Is that just you've got? Is there just a better understanding of insurance, and that's why you've leaned into this, or just you think that's where the more accessible wins are at this stage?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both, right?
Mm,
Because uh, I think I think companies are right to be skeptical of AI, especially generative AI, right? It's so
mm,
new. Everyone's like, this is the holy grail of stuff. But you really have to use it to really believe it. And so I think we all have to acknowledge that it is a bit of a change management process, especially the more you get into core systems and processes within an organization, right? We're not sort of just changing content, right? It's underwriting, it's how you underwrite, it's how you screen candidates, it's things that are core to your business. So as a result of that, I do think, folks are a little bit more cautious, and they rightfully should be cautious because this is actually quite new and it can be quite revolutionary. Um, but you can really push and move the needle forward in still record time. Um, but with the things that they're doing today, right? Because it's easier for them just to pick up. So I think the answer is yes, a bit of both. But I think in general, I think everyone should be just a little bit more cautious.
where do you think and this might be a out of scope question, but where where are the most obvious quick wins for you looking at it from a like looking at the whole insurance value chain? If we was to sort of adopt AI and are there some obvious quick wins for you that people aren't kind of putting in? I think like operations, and I'm like, I don't think we're putting in enough there. And there's some, as you said about building Sixfold, is like there are some commodity products that probably work there. But yeah, I just thought with that expert eye, are there some obvious kind of areas that are probably underutilizing AI that already exist today that we could probably implement?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people start in operations. Actually, I think people, I think marketers that use this today, I think they're
Mm,
very smart. Like, I think
yeah.
even our own like lead marketer, she uses it for brainstorming, all of those types of things. I think it's so good for that. Um, our developers use it. We use Copilot. We test all these new models. I think that's sort of easy. We have been seeing it in more claims, and definitely underwriting because it's where we sit. And I feel like we're also hearing things like brokers are using it for XYZ reasons too. I think people across insurance have been thinking about this actually much more critically. Um, than from a year ago. It's actually sort of crazy how
Mm,
fast, that needle moved when we first started our business, everyone's like, you should only use this for marketing. Underwriting is too sensitive, all these different things. And we're just like, no, 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 we can definitely do this. We can do this quite securely and safely. And then now a year later, I feel like everyone's talking about it, right? So I feel like we made that jump I think the whole collective industry just made that jump because they saw the potential of where it can be. So I do think a lot of people are playing with it in different areas and facets. And I think just given how the technology is, I actually don't think any rock is unturned. I think everyone actually is looking for, places to put this.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, I mean, there's so many opportunities for the use case, and yeah, this is a big industry. There's so many moving parts, and I think the important thing is, and I think something you and I touched on in prior conversations is having small achievable wins with it, and not trying to go right. We're going to wholesale change everything, and it's an evolution. It's not a change management project, as you rightly pointed out. The the challenge is obviously we're working in a regulated market, and one of the things that you and I were going to talk about, and this is definitely where I'm going to lead into 100% your experience and probably have less to say, was talking about a responsible framework for AI. There's some changes in EU regulation that's going to make this important, but we're talking about a responsible framework. What does this look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, I think every carrier should be skeptical of every vendor that they're trying to bring in, that are bringing them sort of AI solutions. As a vendor, it's my job to basically say and do and showcase to you that we can actually bring these models and our solution to your data, to your use cases in a safe, secure way that is measurable and auditable. Right. So we're a US based company, or we do a lot of work in the UK and EU. But when we first started last year, we were lucky enough to do a number of design reviews with the state of Colorado. And the state of Colorado was the first state to publish their viewpoint of the use of AI in insurance. And it's not just generative AI, it's actually all AI and machine learning models as well. And that got adopted, by New York, the NAIC. So we had the opportunity to chat with regulators really early on. And so the great part there was that we've been always thinking about what is that framework, that structure that we need to put in place internally to say that we're making sure that there's no bias within, our models. That we're still following traditional underwriting rule sets, be it because we're using a lot of our carriers' rule sets. And then also that there's a way to measure any drift and the quality that's coming out from our models as well. So we spent a lot of time putting together more or less this framework so we can also give this to our customers, say like, hey, we thought about all of these things that you may not have thought about yet. So if you want to use something like that, like feel comfortable that, we thought about this too. Now with the EU AI Act, we're doing the same thing, probably in a bit of a different lens because the regulation over there is a little bit different than what is here in the States. And we'll know a lot more in 2 years, when all of the, all the details truly come out.
People definitely, I mean, you touched on it earlier. There was this thing of no one was using AI, and then because you had ChatGPT and you had this accessible, easy to use case, it was amazing how it drove the adoption of, okay, we're comfortable with AI being a solution, but I think people kind of left the reservation pretty quickly with, oh, I'm just going to use ChatGPT to. I mean, there's some terrifying use cases of that. But other tools as well. And it's interesting in a regulated environment how I think some like absolute lack, complete abandonment of how this would impact things from a regulatory standpoint and being protecting people's data, etc. So yeah, I mean the framework thing is so front of mind because I think sometimes we fall in love with the tech and we don't do the not very exciting thing of talking about good use of it. That's always a problem.
And I think it's sort of the same with like sort of any new technology too. It's like, the companies that we work with, they're large enterprises. They have information security teams. It's in a way, it's not that different from that, right? Like you still have to, make sure you're SOC compliant, make sure you're HIPAA compliant. And for that, that's just like good security practice for the enterprise, right? So that's the bar, right? That's the baseline that you have to go for. And then once you have that, then it's like, the additional thing that is whatever is specific to your technology that you have to, make sure that you cover. And if you sort of frame it like that, it's actually not that difficult to, position yourself for compliance and for a regulatory purpose. Because we also get I think, worked up that like, this thing is so new and so crazy and it does this and does that. But actually, if you break it down again, it's like enterprise security always has the stuff that you have to do that you still have to do, even though you're new technology. And like, after you do that, what's left? And then like put something around it to address it.
Yeah, yeah, and the same thing will be true of a lot of technologies. I think the challenge becomes with small to medium sized businesses trying to roll it out because they don't have as much infrastructure to kind of deal with that. But then that's working with responsible vendors, and that becomes a challenge. We're really close to time, so I can't believe it's flown by so quickly. So, firstly, I want to thank you for your time, but secondly, I'd love to hear, it's a really exciting business, Sixfold. Like we've watched with interest from the start. We know some of your investors. We knew, I'd spoken to Alex previously, and so it was great to see the business launch. But what can we look for the rest of the year? And yeah, what does the kind of next like 12-month horizon look like for you?
Yeah. So I guess like in the immediate term, we're sort of all over it, right? So Sixfold is part of the Lloyd's Lab, the cohort 12. So we'll have our pitch day in July. We're also going to be at ITI New York, chatting with OpenAI and also Axis Insurance. I'm bringing back the joy to underwriting. And through the rest of this year, I would say just you'll see a lot more fidelity from Sixfold. We've started in P&C, we went into life. Look for actually these use cases that we've been working on over the last year, with customers that we're really proud of, and we're also really proud of the results. So if there are still any skeptics out there, see some details. We're putting pen to paper for real. It's real. It's definitely here. And also if anyone wants to try it out, like I think the product right now looks and it's so different. It evolved so much from where we were a year ago. And so yeah, I think it's just getting deeper into underwriting. That's really it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, my team and I will be at both of those things. So we'll be at the Lloyd's Pitch Day. We'll also be at ITI New York. So we'll definitely catch up with you there. Jane, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really good and interesting conversation. I knew it would be. I really appreciate you being a guest on the podcast.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.